Hey there, everyone. Good afternoon. Glad you can make it. Question today. Any thoughts on favorite superheroes? And while you're thinking about that, hopefully you got my email this morning with the Unit 5 study guide. We are starting Unit 5 today. So I would highly recommend having that study guide out so that you can kind of just take notes on it as we go through class. Helps ensure that you have what you need to do well on the unit test. But then any thoughts on favorite superheroes, or are we maybe just not a superhero crowd? Which is fine. I'd say ultimately more of a Marvel person in general, but Batman's probably the standout. Brad going Spider-Man, also a good pick. Would definitely be up there for me. Nice Catwoman for Brooke. Okay. Obviously, feel free to share in others, but let's go ahead and get to the vocab slide, as we do have a decent amount of vocab. Doctor Strange, good pick, Dakota. I like it. So Unit 5 is going to focus on what we call linkage institutions. So that's going to be one of the first things we talk about is the concept of the electorate and then what linkage institutions in general are. And then specifically, we're going to start looking at political parties as a linkage institution. So we'll kind of explore, what are political parties? We'll talk a bit about the two major political parties in the US, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, as part of what's called the two-party system. And we'll hopefully also get to talk a little bit about the concept of third parties in the United States. While you're jotting that down, a heads up that we won't have a Class Connect tomorrow because tomorrow is the staff professional development day for March. Still a school day. You should still log in for homeroom first thing in the morning. But then for government, instead, there's a crash course video for you to watch that's in the course plan. And then, of course, just also want to make sure that you get the weekly reflection done. The other thing you want to keep in mind is, again, in about 2 weeks, March 31st, units 1, 2, 3, and 4 will lock. So you have about 2 weeks left to get any missing assignments from those first 4 units turned in. What is especially going to be important for some of you is making sure you get the Unit 4 test done. I saw that some of you took the Unit 4 test yesterday. Some of you haven't yet, and that's fine. But just don't let that slip off your radar. Make sure you do get that done within the next 2 weeks, or otherwise you're going to be stuck with a 0 for the Unit 4 test. And of course, if you have any questions about that, let me know, send me an email. But all right, take one last look at the vocab list if you need to, and let's get going. So let's begin by talking about this concept of the electorate. The electorate is simply made up of all of the people in a country or area who are entitled to vote in an election. People who theoretically could vote. Doesn't mean they all do, because as we've looked at in the United States, a lot of Americans end up choosing not to vote. But and ultimately, anyone who is a U.S. citizen is 18 years of age and older, and doesn't have something going on preventing them from voting, like potentially serving time in jail. They make up what's known as the electorate. And when we then try to look at the relationship between government and the electorate, what ends up playing a big role is what are known as linkage institutions. So the official definition, linkage institutions are structures within a society that connect the people to the government or centralized authority. These institutions include elections, political parties, interest groups, and the media. But ultimately, a linkage institution is anything that helps connect the electorate, potential voters, to government. And so when you think about a chain link, that's what we mean when we talk about linkage institutions. It's the things that help connect us as members of the electorate to government. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on Unit 5. We're starting today with political parties, how they help connect us to government, but then we'll also go through elections, interest groups, and the media. That's really going to kind of be our focus for Unit 5, is looking at how each of these things plays a role in connecting people to government and how it ultimately impacts government. And so we're starting off here today with political parties. And here in the United States, we have two political parties, Republicans and the Democrats. And as seen here, each party has an animal mascot. Does anyone know which party is represented by the elephant? Which party matches up with the elephant? Does anyone happen to already know? Again, we got one person feeling brave, putting out a guess there for Democrats. Anyone else want to take a guess? Agree, disagree? Fair enough, Brad, fair enough. Good, all right, we're going to learn something new here. The elephant would be the mascot of the Republican Party, and the donkey would be the mascot of the Democratic Party. That's important to know, because oftentimes when there are political cartoons about government, cartoonists will oftentimes use the image of the elephant or the donkey to represent the parties. So knowing which party is which is helpful, because then that can help you better understand political cartoons, for example. The Democrats got their mascot first back when Andrew Jackson was running for president. People who did not like Jackson frequently would refer to him as a jackass. And Jackson kind of thought that was funny. And so he decided, let's run with it. Let's embrace the donkey as our mascot of the Democratic Party. And so that's how the donkey ultimately became the mascot of the Democratic Party. Later on in the late 1800s, then the Republican Party embraced the elephant because in political cartoons, some cartoonists used the image of the elephant as being this big stomping animal, kind of stomping through things in government. And so the Republicans kind of embraced that as an image. And so the elephant kind of became the mascot of the Republican Party. The parties each both have a party color they associate with. Does anyone recall, what is the party color for the Democratic Party? Or feeling brave and willing to take a guess? Nice, Alyssa. Yes, you'd be correct. That blue would be the party color for the Democrats. How about for the Republican Party? Any thoughts or guesses on what the Republican Party's color is? Fantastic. Yes, red. So that's also important to remember, because when on the news they may talk about like red states or red voters, that would mean Republican leaning voters, versus blue states would be Democratic leaning voters. And you can kind of help remember because, Republican, red, they both start with an R. Democrat, donkey, both start with a D. So you got some tricks there that can help you keep those things separate. But then let's do a quick pulse check question. I'll bring up the polling tools in just a second. Uh, what does a linkage institution help people do? What's kind of the purpose of a linkage institution? Thinking back to that definition we just looked at. Would it be A, linkage institutions help people understand their family history? B, become disinterested in local politics? C, interact with their government? Or D, stay current on scientific developments? Which of those would best explain the purpose of a linkage institution? And feel free to drag the polling tools off to the side if you need to look over the question. And if you're still debating, go ahead and make a selection. Take your best guess. That way you can see if you get it right or not. Also lets me know that you're here and participating. Got responses from about half of you so far. There's a couple more. Thank you. Still just looking for a response from Alex. Carly, if you want to send me a private chat message. Dakota C. Jacob. Paloma. Oh, we're close. We're so close. We only got 4 people left. One day, I hold out hope that one day we'll get a response from everyone. But good. Those of you that selected C, you would be correct. The primary purpose of a linkage institution is it helps people interact or be connected to their government. And again, a way that can help you think about that, when we think about linkages or links, like in a chain link fence, there are connections. We're connecting two things together. And so a linkage institution helps connect the electorate, potential voters, to the government, and be more able to interact with their government. And of course, that would include political parties. So, what are your guys' thoughts on this? We've identified who the 2 major political parties are in the United States. What does a political party do? What might be its purpose or its role in government? Any opening thoughts on that? Or thoughts on why might people like political parties? Why might they kind of appreciate having them? Because let's say, for example, you had a voter who was trying to figure out who they were going to vote for in the next election. Why might having political parties help them out? Because, for example, do any of you know anyone who is like a big supporter of a political party? Maybe you got someone who like is a big champion of the Republican Party. Maybe you know someone who is a strong supporter of the Democratic Party. Anyone kind of like knows someone like that in their life? Like I, for example, have an aunt and an uncle who are very much in politics, spent time working in politics even. And so they very strongly identify with one political party. They've even decorated their basement in historical party advertisements from the party they support. And so when it comes time for them to vote on election day, they usually don't have to spend a whole lot of time figuring out who they're going to vote for because they vote for the political party they identify with. And so that can be one of the ways that political parties can be helpful, is helping people figure out who they want to vote for based on which party do they agree with more. Um, so for example, thinking back to that political survey quiz we did, if, for example, you scored like 80% with the Republican Party, there's a good chance you're probably going to prefer voting for Republican candidates when you vote. Whereas if you scored a high score with the Democratic Party, that might be an indication that, when you go to vote, you're probably going to favor voting for the Democratic candidates. Um, because ultimately, political parties exist to try to organize people who have similar values and political concerns. Um, because, for example, let's say you as an individual really wanted to change something in government. There's some piece of government where you're like, that's messed up. I don't understand why we do it that way. This is how it should be changed. Um, why might that be difficult to change government if you were kind of just one person? Why might a single person have trouble changing some piece of government, like a law, for example? What do you guys think about that? Why might one person, even a person who feels very passionately about something, why might it be hard for one person to change a part of government? And since it seems like we're having trouble thinking about this, maybe let me ask this question instead. Why might it be hard for one person to run a business? Let's say, for example, you were going to have a restaurant and it was going to be one person working and running that entire restaurant. What might be difficult about that? Excellent, Brad. Yeah, that's way too much work for one person to do. Uh, that person would have to be, uh, the host that, takes reservations and seats people at the table. That person would have to be the waiter. That person would have to be the cook in the kitchen and, cleaning up the tables. Way too much work for one person to do. And the same thing is true with government as well. When we talk about passing a new law, back in Unit 3, remember that was a huge, complicated process that requires a law to go through multiple steps before it gets passed. And so, what Americans quickly figured out is in our political system, if you're going to really try to get anything done in government, you need help. You need multiple people working together. And so political parties help politically active people get things done by organizing people that have similar values and political concerns and saying, okay, we may not agree with everything, but we're kind of generally on the same page. Conservatives, for example, want to, lower government regulation. Democrats want to expand social programs for lower income people. There might be some disagreements in the details about how to do that, but that is generally speaking a view, that unites people in one political party or another. And the idea is, okay, by working together, we're probably more likely to make some progress on these goals versus if everyone's trying to do their own thing individually. And so political parties then help provide the organization and, arguably more importantly today, the funds or the money to help their candidates get elected. So, for example, when someone identifies as being a Republican running for governor, for example, they're not doing it on their own. The Republican Party comes in and provides support for that Republican running for governor, giving them funds, providing them access to different people who might help out and have good advice on how to win an election, and all kinds of different resources. And so one of the powers political parties have is they ultimately get to nominate candidates to run for office under their party. So, for example, next year, we're going to have another presidential election. And so, as part of that, the Republican Party needs to figure out who's going to be its nominee, who is going to be the person that the Republican Party supports for president. You already have a couple of people running for president. Donald Trump is trying to run for reelection. The former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, is running. There's a lot of indications that the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, is going to run. So you ultimately don't want 3 Republicans running for president under your party. Because why would that probably be a bad idea for a political party if they had 3 different people running for president under the Republican Party? Because let's say if you had one Democrat running for president and three Republicans for voters to choose from. At first, that might sound good for the Republican Party of like, oh, there's more choices in the Republican Party. But why would that probably mean that the Republican Party is going to lose the election if there are three different Republicans people could vote for? If there's one Democrat running for president and three Republicans, why is that probably going to be bad news for the Republican Party? Why is the Republican Party probably going to lose that election if there are three different people running under the Republican Party? Because in that scenario, for the people who want to vote Democrat, how many choices do they have? If there are three Republicans and one Democrat running for president, and a person knows they want to vote for the Democratic Party, how many choices does that voter have? I mean, technically they have four, but we're talking about someone who knows they want to vote for the Democratic Party. So if you know you're going to vote for the Democratic Party, yeah, exactly. You have just one choice. Whereas let's say you have a voter who wants to vote Republican. How many choices do they have then in this scenario? Right, they have three, which ultimately means that the Republican vote is going to get divided somehow amongst those three different candidates. It's going to split their vote. Whereas the Democratic Party is going to be united under one candidate. And that's basically going to guarantee the Democratic Party wins the election because all the Democratic voters are kind of voting for this one person. The Republican Party gets split up among three. We actually saw this happen in the 1912 presidential election, where there were essentially two Republicans running, Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. And so they split the Republican vote, and that then made it very easy for the Democratic candidate, Woodrow Wilson, to win the election. So to avoid that, political parties nominate candidates at party conventions where they say, okay, this is who we are running for governor. This is who we are running for Congress. This is who we are running for president. So that their party vote doesn't get split up. Another important responsibility of political parties is to oppose the other political party, especially when the other political party is viewed as overstepping their position, as an additional system of kind of checks and balances. So, for example, when Donald Trump was president, there were concerns that he was abusing his power of trying to pressure Ukraine to help him win re-election in exchange for military support for Ukraine. And so ultimately the Democrats in Congress, pushed back against Donald Trump and conducted an impeachment hearing on the situation, because that was viewed as potentially being an overstep and Donald Trump abusing his power as president. Or, for example, now that Republicans control the House of Representatives, they are conducting different investigations to see, has there potentially been issues that President Biden has overstepped the line. So ultimately, here in the United States, historically, we have had what's known as a two-party system, which, as the name implies, is you really only have two competitive political parties in the United States. Those parties have changed throughout history, as we'll probably talk about on Tuesday. But currently, it would be the Democrats and the Republicans. So, generally speaking, if you are wanting to vote for someone who will actually have a chance at winning the election, you probably need to vote for either the Democrat or the Republican. And again, this is because here in the United States, we have that first past the post voting system, winner takes all. So, for example, if a political party gains 10% of the vote, that's a pretty good chunk of the vote. 10% of voters wanted that party. Doesn't matter. You get nothing with 10% of the vote. You have to get the most votes if you want to win something. So here in the United States, our elections tend to kind of be this, slug match, between the Democrats and the Republicans. It's kind of just that tug of war between those two parties. What you see here is a map of the world based on how many political parties they have. You can look at what all the different colors represent in terms of how many political parties they have. So looking at this map, what does this tell us about other countries throughout the world? Here in the United States, we're this blue color. We have two political parties in Congress, the Democrats and the Republicans. How does that seem to compare to the rest of the world based on this map? Yeah, ultimately, we have very little in terms of competitive political parties. Most other countries in the world have multiple political parties that have power in their legislative branch. You have some countries that, for example, are in the double digits. A lot of variety of political parties. And so, for a critical thinking challenge for today, I want to get your thoughts on this. As a private chat message, send me your thoughts. What can you think of as potentially being either a positive or a negative of having a two-party system? There are maybe some benefits of having two political parties. There may be some negatives to that. If you're able to, ideally, if you can come up with both a positive and a negative, but see what all you can think of or come up with. We're kind of just brainstorming here. There's no one right or wrong answer. But let me give you 5 minutes. We'll kind of come back here and discuss at 1:10. So again, what can you think of as being a positive or a negative of America having a two-party system? we have essentially two parties to choose from when we vote. And just checking in, you got a little over a minute left if you haven't sent me a response already. If you have already sent me a response and you came up with a positive or a negative, see if you can come up, with the other side. Kind of challenge yourself. And so, yeah, to clarify the question, here in the United States, you essentially have just two parties to pick from, either the Democrat or the Republican. In other countries, you may have 4, 5, 6 different political parties you can pick from. In what ways might that be nice that there's just two parties to pick from? In what ways might it be a negative that there are just really two parties that exist in the United States? And so let me grab some of the responses we have so far, and kind of trying to do my best to organize things into positives and negatives here. So I've kind of had to cut up people's responses a bit. Um, Definitely seems like it was easier for people to come up with negatives versus positives, based on what you guys have sent me so far. And if you're still writing up a response, that's okay. Definitely want to hear from you. See if I can try to get everything to fit in here. All right. Excellent. Some really good responses here. Let me get the chat open back up. And yeah, David, if you needed help with something or had a question, let me know. See your hand is raised. But generally speaking, as some of you guys indicated, a benefit of the two-party system is it keeps things rather simple. It's generally either this or that. You essentially have two flavors: Democrat or Republican. Which one do you want? Keeps it a rather simple decision making process. And of course, we would hope that both parties are wanting to do what they think is best for the country. They're obviously going to have different interpretations of what that is. But yeah, as a voter here in the United States, oftentimes, you really just have to narrow it down between two options. Do you like the Democrat or the Republican more? So it arguably makes it simple in terms of who to figure out who to voting for. David, to your comment, I do that intentionally. I turn off the class chat when we do the critical thinking challenges, so that people don't accidentally send their responses and in the group chat, and then people just like copy and paste it. So when we do the critical thinking challenges, I'm asking you to send me a private chat message through the questions and answers chat. So then jumping over here to the negatives, a lot of great observations here. Again, you guys are quiet on me oftentimes, but you really do have a lot of good observations. And so one is, some of you identified that, well, we're limited in our choices because you only got two. And maybe neither the Republican nor the Democrat really matches up well with your political views. And so sometimes that can cause people to become discouraged from voting because they're like, I don't really like the Republican or the Democrat. I don't really feel like either is a good fit. And so sometimes people just decide, I'm not going to vote because I don't have that like perfect candidate I can pick, or that party that really perfectly lines up with all of my views. So that can be a negative. Or for example, as mentioned here, it oftentimes can cause voters to kind of have to approach voting as choosing the lesser of two evils. Well, I don't really like the Republican. There's definitely things I disagree with the Democrat, but I guess, I agree a little bit more with one over the other. I'm not super happy with either, but I guess I like one a little bit more. So that's who I'm going to vote for. So yes, definitely. Oftentimes here in the United States, people are making their voting selection not because they're super thrilled with who they're voting for, but because based off those two choices they have, saying, well, between the two, I think I like this one better. I'm not exactly 100% thrilled with it, but I think it's better than the other choice. So that's who I'm voting for. And that can be discouraging for some people. Oftentimes people want to vote for someone they're really like enthusiastic for, and they think, oh my gosh, this guy's like going to really fix the country. But oftentimes when we're voting, we're thinking, this person might do some good. I don't agree with everything, but better than the other choice. And then, yes, definitely Matt being president does have a lot of work involved with it, for sure. Finally, a number of you hit upon this really important point that because we have just two political parties in the United States, it's oftentimes just a tug of war match between those two parties, us versus them. Any loss for them is a gain for us. Whereas in state or in countries that have multiple political parties, that oftentimes forces the political parties to work with one another because no one party, gets over 50% of the seats. And so in order to get anything passed, in order to get anything done, you have to build relationships with members of government from other political parties. But here in the United States, especially in our current environment, Democrats and Republicans oftentimes are motivated to not work with one another because it's very much an us versus them kind of mindset. Some other issues. It puts a heavy emphasis on raising money because, again, in order to get anything out of an election, you need to get the most votes. Getting 10% of the vote, that gets you nothing. So that puts a huge pressure on both political parties to try to raise as much money as possible to try to put their candidate over the edge, to get the most votes so they actually get something for it. Because even if you get 49% of the vote, if the other party gets 51% of the vote, sorry about you. That 49% gets you nothing at the end of the day. And again, because parties have to try to get the most votes, it's not enough to get 20% of a vote for something. It often means both parties oftentimes focus on issues that grab people's attention, that tend to rile people up one way or the other. In our current environment, I would argue immigration and abortion are two of the top issues that just politicians talk about them all the time because people get very emotional about it oftentimes. Even when their job's not going to be tied to that. I, for example, remember in a local election recently for, I think it was coroner, which is like the person who issues death certificates, when a person's died. And on their webpage had all of their views on immigration. And it's like, you're running to be the coroner. Your job literally has nothing to do with immigration. But that candidate knew immigration's a big topic that people get riled up about. So it was on the webpage. Matt, to your question, yes. When you go to vote for president, you can have the option of writing in a candidate's name. Some people might argue that that's basically wasting your vote because you're not, helping to, influence, which of the two candidates, actually has a chance at winning the presidency. But ultimately, you can write in a name when you go to vote. All right. I see we're pretty much just out of time, so we'll go ahead and stop there today. On Tuesday, we'll talk about third parties. I don't want to start that when we only got 30 seconds left. So we'll go ahead and stop there. Again, remember for tomorrow, make sure to watch the video that's posted in the course plan and complete your weekly reflection. If you have any questions, feel free to stick around. Happy to talk. Otherwise, you guys are good to go. Hope you have a great weekend. I will see you back here on Tuesday. See you, Dakota. See you, Matt. All right, and then not seeing any questions pop up in the chat, so I'm assuming we're good to close up the room here.